Hello, welcome. Can see those of you joining. Hopefully you can see and hear me all right. I'm Charlie White. I'm going to be spending this morning with you. Welcome. Wow, we've got lots of people logging on. We'll just make a start in a minute or two just to give everybody the chance to join us. So if you want to quickly grab a cup of tea or anything like that, go ahead. We'll make a start in the next couple of minutes. If there's any issues with connection, please drop a message in the chat box on the bottom right hand side of your screen, because then if it's more than a few of you, then there's probably an issue my end. So great, Rebecca's let me know that you can hear me. That's brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. We have got the opportunity at the end of this session to ask some questions. Last time there was about 10 minutes at the end, but if you have a question as we're going through the webinar, if a question pops up for you, what you can do is just click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your cursor there, click on the Q&A, type your question. I will see that a question has been asked, and at the end, I will either verbally answer it to everybody, or if we run out of time, I promise I will write a written response. So as and when questions come up for you, just feel free to type it in the Q&A. I'll get to as many as I can on this session, and any that are left over, I will write to you directly with those. So I'll just give it another minute. Thank you, Ellie's. Ellie's let me know that everything's okay her end. That's brilliant. Last time I did this session this time last week, and it just got to this point on the webinar and I just got booted out by my internet or by Zoom, one of the two, and I lost everybody and had to quickly log back in again, and then it worked fine. So let's hope that that doesn't happen this time. Right, so we've got just over 100 of us online, so I'm going to make a start. For those of you who have just joined, I'm Charlie White. I'm a trainer, a coach, and also I facilitate away days and team sessions. So I've worked in the charity sector for over 20 years now, and my background is in fundraising. So I specialised in major gift fundraising and mid-value fundraising. And I've worked for large organisations like the NSPCC and the National Trust. I've also worked for smaller organisations like a hospice out in Wellington. And of course, since I've been running my own business, I've worked with hundreds of charities now, both mainly in the UK, but also internationally, mainly helping teams with their well-being, essentially, the things that can get in our way of enjoying our job, of really thriving in our role. Because let's face it, working for non-profits can be pretty demanding. So it's really, really important that we look after our well-being. And I think increasingly across the sector, we're seeing greater recognition, really, that having the skills to do your job, you know, that's a good start, but it isn't enough. We also need to help our teams to really have the skills to bounce back in the face of challenges, manage stress, increase their well-being, and so on. And then, of course, we can do our jobs and be much more effective at the tasks and the skills that we've honed. So that's a little bit about me. How I came to be kind of in front of you today really is quite a kind of personal journey. I had a fairly demanding role in a charity about 4 years ago, heading up the fundraising there. And I don't mind sharing with you that I essentially burnt out. And for me, that wasn't a sudden sort of click, sort of can't get out of bed in the morning type experience. For me, it was a gradual erosion of all the things that made me me. So I gradually sort of all my sort of hobbies fell by the wayside. I gradually saw less of my friends because I just didn't have the energy to meet up in the evenings. I wasn't taking care of myself as well as I should have been. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't eating particularly well. Wasn't sleeping well for sure. And where I got to really was that by the end of each day, and certainly by the end of each week, all that was left for my friends and family were kind of the scraps left on the table. I just didn't have anything left, certainly not left for myself or for the people closest to me. And I found myself in my annual appraisal, probably December 2016, and I got really good feedback. It's all going well from the perspective of my employee and my manager, but my own experience was really, really, really difficult. And I was really honest with my manager, and I said, this feedback is great, but I don't believe it. I just feel like I'm not doing a good job. I just feel like I'm, that sense where you're kind of paddling under the water, but on the top you're like a swan, just kind of gracefully and calmly going through work. That was what I was like. So it did come as a shock to my manager that I was struggling, and was the impact that I only shared some of the impact it was having on my home life. And she was really, really good. She leapt into action and said, Charlie, look, would you consider working with a leadership coach? So I had 6 sessions with him over the course of about 4 months. And it completely transformed how I went about that role, how I felt about myself in that role. And it's not that the role got any less demanding in that time. If anything, it got more demanding because my peer left, and then her team moved into my team. So suddenly I had even higher fundraising targets that I was responsible for, even more direct reports. So it wasn't that the role became less demanding, it was just how I approached it completely changed. And really that led to the happiest, really, and most effective 18 months of my career to date. And what I did was thought, well, I just can't be the only person in the sector who was feeling that way. So started having conversations with my peers and other organisations, and some similar themes were coming through. People were hiding it well often, but the toll was being felt outside of work, usually. So I myself trained as a coach a few years ago, and now, as I say, I go about coaching individuals, particularly women in leadership or emerging leaders, and also working with teams around their well-being and how can you be the most effective team possible if you're all stressed out and feeling overwhelmed and low in energy. So that's what I do now, and that's how I came to be in front of you today. I think this topic is particularly important at the moment. It's extremely tough times for non-profit organisations, as we know. Our beneficiaries, the reason why our organisations exist, the people that we're here to serve, they need us now more than ever. Income, there's more pressures on our income. We're expected to do more and more with less. Income in some areas is declining. And as we know, there's increased competition for certain pots of money as well. And many of you on the line, I know, are on furlough leave at the moment, and that brings with it a unique set of sort of uncertainty and mixed feelings, really. A lot of people I've coached over the last 2 or 3 weeks, some feel able to sort of re-embrace the furlough leave and use it as a chance to spend quality time with family and maybe do things that they ordinarily wouldn't have time to do. But for others, it's more unsettling than that. They don't yet know whether they're going to have a role to come back to, or what the nature of that role will be. And of course, our non-profit organisations many of us are having to completely overhaul how we deliver our services. And that in itself is leading to a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty. And I mean, never before has there been a directive from the government to say we can't see our friends and family. Now, if that isn't going to take a toll on our well-being, I don't know what is. And I certainly am feeling the ramifications of that now that we're sort of 5 or 6 weeks in. So these are very strange times, and whilst I'm not going to dwell on COVID-19, I think the tools and techniques I'm going to share with you today are applicable whether we're in a pandemic or not. I just want to recognise that this is, I hope, even more important that you're spending this time on yourself today. So what I encourage you to do in terms of how this session is going to run is I encourage you to just relax, sit back, let the information wash over you. I will send you a recording of this and also the slides and a couple of handouts afterwards. So you don't need to worry about frantically scribbling away, taking notes. Just jot anything down that is really pertinent and that really resonates with you if you want to. Do have a notepad and pen to hand though, because there's going to be a couple of exercises that I'd love us to do together, that for you to get the most out of that, it does help you to write things down. And yeah, just try and take this as time for you, really. I don't take it lightly that you've trusted me with the next hour and a half of your time. I know how hugely busy you must be. I thank you for that. And I just, yeah, I really hope that you get out of this what you want to. So before I crack on, I just want to be really clear about what I mean when I say resilient and what I mean when I say well-being. So well-being is generally kind of widely understood as being that sense, that experience of high life satisfaction. You know, where you just feel beaming with health, we feel content, um, feel fulfilled, and that what you require for well-being, high levels of well-being, will be different for each of you. So what I need in order to have high levels of well-being will be different for you and you and you. And so there isn't, unfortunately, a magic formula where I can say, you know what, if you do this, this, and this, you will automatically have high levels of well-being. There are common themes though. Obviously, there are some things that all of us need, some of the basics that we all need in order to have a chance of thriving, and we will look at those. But I suppose this session is more about self-reflection, self-discovery. So hopefully you will leave with some tools and techniques that really work for you. In terms of resilience, it's quite an unusual term in some ways, and it's used, but it is used a lot. And I think it's quite hard to, it's not very tangible. And we hear the term bandied around a lot and not necessarily a great level of agreement on what it means. So, to be super clear, what I mean when I say resilience is that capacity and capability that we have as individuals to bounce back in the face of adversity. And ideally, not only to bounce back, but to bounce forward and to use the challenge, use the adversity to not only take us back to where we were before it occurred, but also beyond that and use it as an opportunity for growth and development. And I've got a slide here that I think really brings the term resilience to life, which has been kind of really, when I've shared this, people have responded really well to it. So let me take you through this now. So let's imagine that this is you sailing through your week at work. You set off on the Monday, say, and you know where you're heading, you know what you want to achieve with the day, and you feel really clear about where you're off to. Now, you'll notice that there are some boulders underneath the surface there, and they really represent the challenges that inevitably come up in everyday life. But when our resilience, represented by the water level here, when our resilience is nice and high, we can sail over those challenges with relative ease. They don't impact on us too fully. Doesn't mean those challenges aren't there, it's just that the impact on us is lessened and it doesn't send us off course. However, when our resilience level is less than high, so maybe it's halfway down this riverbed, this water represented by the water, maybe it's halfway down, then you can imagine us sailing across and we're going to hit up against those boulders with much greater force. May even dent our boat a little bit, leave us a little bit bruised and unsettled and unstable. And then we approach the next challenge, the next boulder, and we're hitting up against that from a less strong perspective. More water is lost over the side, so more resilience is lost as we navigate ourselves around that boulder, and then we keep going until we hit up against another challenge, another boulder. More water, more resilience is lost. And so there is a cumulative effect with resilience. If our resilience is lost because of a challenge that we're facing, if we don't do anything and we don't take action to top our resilience levels back up, then we will approach the next challenge from a point of lower resilience. And so it goes on until we can run the risk of by the end of the week, say, getting to the point where the water levels represented in this image are, maybe really low along the bottom of that riverbed. Our resilience is really low, and maybe every single pebble, rock, stone, even grain of sand you feel the impact of that. You feel that scraping along the bottom of your boat. And that really is the point whereby even the smallest, comparatively insignificant challenges can feel insurmountable and can feel like a big thing for us to have to overcome. And that's really what we want to prevent us getting to that point. If you're hearing that description and you're recognizing that that is where you are at the moment in terms of your resilience, maybe your resilience is that low, then I really, really encourage you to reach out to get some support. Give your GP a call, speak to your manager, speak to a trusted loved one, talk to a professional organisation, whichever of those options feel right for you in that moment. It's really hard when our resilience is that low to get our resilience topped up to a point where we're sailing above those challenges as we would ideally want to be. We all need help every now and then, and being resilient doesn't equate to being self-sufficient. Reaching out for help, asking for help is a resilient act in itself. So following this session, I will send you some sort of a handout, and in the appendix of that handout is a list of organisations, a list of websites that you can look at where you can get some extra support. But the good news about resilience, I think anyway, is that it can be increased. It's not something that's it's static. We can take action for ourselves to top our resilience levels back up so that we can navigate life's challenges with greater ease and with less sort of personal impact on us. So that is what this session is about. It's about what can we do, what actions can you take to build up your resilience. And of course, resilience and well-being there's an interplay there, isn't there? If we can more easily bounce back from challenges, then our well-being will naturally be higher. And when our well-being is higher, then we're more able to bounce back from challenges. So there's a kind of seesaw effect there. There's an interplay. So during times of uncertainty and change and fear, inevitably, for many of us, we will experience our stress levels increasing. So what I want to do next is for us to all have a conversation about stress. And we know that stress can have a profound impact on our well-being. If you think about some of the common symptoms of stress, so for many of us, high levels of stress will impact on our ability to sleep. It will impact on our ability to think clearly, to stay focused, our ability to make decisions. For some of us, stress impacts our appetite. So some people might lose their appetite, feel nauseous, feel that kind of jittery anxiety tummy. Some of us might feel lethargic and almost like procrastinating and avoiding some tasks or avoiding people. For other of us, stress is more of a feeling of sort of feeling wired and that you can't switch off, and might find yourself kind of scrolling through your phone quite sort of vigorously and not necessarily reading anything or delving into anything, but just having that heightened kind of sense of energy, heightened sense of awareness, is feeling wired. So our heart might be racing, might feel a bit breathless. Another common symptom of stress, of course, is feeling irritable, and tired, and like things like having a shorter temper. I know that certainly is the case for me. My sense of humour goes out the window when I'm experiencing higher levels of stress. And so all of these symptoms, and there's many more that we could talk about here, but they have a profound impact on our well-being. So if we can better manage our stress levels, our ability to bounce back from challenges, our resilience will increase, and also our well-being. And so the number one thing that has helped me to better manage my stress levels is to increase my understanding of what it is that goes on in my body when I am experiencing stress. And that really has been quite a profound changing point in me when it comes to managing my stress levels. So I'm going to talk to you now about the fight or flight response. You will all have heard of it, I'm sure, the fight or flight response. It's mentioned often in our kind of common culture. But what I've noticed is, and it certainly was the case for me, that we don't necessarily understand what it actually is, what actually is going on in our body. So you may or may not be aware that when the fight or flight response is triggered, cortisol, the stress hormone, and adrenaline shoots up in our body. And what that actually does is make our blood, the blood in our body, really thick and sticky. And it flows much kind of a bit more slower through our body, and that's why our heart has to pump much harder to get that blood flowing around. And doctors actually call it sticky blood. Now, when, back in the day, we might have needed to be surviving a lion attack, that heightened cortisol and adrenaline was really useful. We needed to be able to run away. We needed to be able to climb up that tree really quickly. We needed to be able to potentially wrestle that lion to the ground and fight for our life. But when we're thinking about modern day stresses, that increased cortisol and adrenaline isn't as helpful. This thick, sticky blood, again, back in the day, if that lion had taken a swipe at us, it was probably really useful that the blood was thick and sticky and clotted quickly so that we didn't bleed out. But in modern day, what that thick, sticky blood does is when it's running through our brain and our brain is flooded with this thick, sticky blood, it makes the synapses in our brain fire off much more slowly. So our thoughts, our ability to make decisions, our emotions, our ability to understand our emotions, all of that is slowed down because the synapses in our brain just aren't functioning to the peak of their ability because they're weighed down by this thick, sticky blood. The other thing that happens in the fight or flight response is that the blood moves away from where it's not needed to where it is needed. So if you are trying to survive a lion attack, it's not important in that moment that you digest that sandwich that you had at lunch, say. So that is why the blood moves away from our digestive system. So it moves away from our digestive system, which means that some of us experience that loss of blood around the digestive system as a sort of loss of appetite. And I mentioned, didn't I, that kind of butterfly feeling in the tummy, that you get like when you've got an interview that day and you wake up in the morning and you're just you feel all jittery. It's like for some of us that can evoke that sense, and that is the loss of blood around our digestive system. For other people, that loss of blood around the digestive system plays out in a different way. So the signal for those people will go to the brain to say, look, you're empty, you need fuel. So some people will find themselves overeating when they're stressed. And of course, if we have chronic stress over a long period of time, that can lead to a loss of appetite. So we might lose weight, or we can increase our appetite and we might gain weight. And if the blood isn't around our digestive system, then we're not absorbing nutrients as efficiently as we could be. And that, of course, can compromise our immune system and lead to us picking up bugs and, we kind of can find ourselves becoming unwell more often. So it's really important, particularly at the moment where we want our immune system to be as strong as possible, that we are absorbing good nutrients. And that requires a healthy blood flow around our digestive system, which in turn requires lower levels of cortisol and adrenaline. So when we're talking about stress, managing our stress, that is what we're talking about lowering those two hormones. The other thing that happens, which I found fascinating when I was learning about this, is that the blood in our brain, not only is it thick and sticky, but it moves to the old part of the brain, part of the brain that's focused on survival. So if you imagine that this is your spinal column, this is the amygdala, the old part of the brain focused on survival, and this is the new part of the brain. The blood, when the fight or flight response is triggered, the blood moves to the old part of the brain. And that is why our senses are heightened. We feel on high alert. We might feel quite agitated and wired. And when we get tired of being in that state, that's when we can go into the opposite and feel lethargic, and that we just don't notice things and we become super forgetful. But by the blood moving to the old part of the brain, it keeps our heart pumping and our lungs breathing and so on. But it moves away from the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And any of you psychologists out there will know much more about this than me, but from my understanding is the front of the brain is like the CEO of the brain. It's where our ability to weigh up one decision over another lies. It's where our ability to have empathy for others sits. It's where our ability to think creatively is. It's where our IQ sits. It's where our emotional intelligence lies. So our ability to regulate our emotions and recognize emotions in others. And that's why when we're feeling stressed and cortisol and adrenaline rises in our body, that is why we have those symptoms that I listed earlier. That's why we can find ourselves finding it difficult to focus, finding it difficult to concentrate, finding it difficult to make a decision, finding it difficult to crack on with our work, and we can end up avoiding things. We find it difficult to make positive decisions. You know, we might know that going for a run at lunchtime would do us good, but it becomes harder to make that positive decision and to take action on it because the blood isn't where we need it to be, which is at the front of the brain. And if you're on this call and you're a manager and you've got, you know, your direct report sat in front of you or over a kind of Zoom call and you're talking to them and they're talking about how overwhelmed they might be feeling or if they're experiencing stress, that is not the time to ask your direct report to think creatively about how to solve this problem or how to grow this income stream or whatever it might be. The blood just isn't at the front of the brain where they need it to be in order to think in that way. So the best thing you can do as a line manager in that point is help them to lower their stress levels. And we'll look at that in a moment. So it's really important when we're talking about our well-being that we as individuals have the ability to recognize what are our individual personal signs of strain. So what are those early signs that our cortisol levels and our adrenaline levels are increasing? So what I encourage you to do now is just on the left-hand side of your page, is just write down what are the signs of strain for you? What are those early indicators that you are experiencing stress or about to experience stress, that your cortisol and adrenaline levels in your body are starting to go up? What might be the early indicators for you? And just jot them down, and the greater clarity you can have about that, the more readily you can recognize those signs as early on as possible and then take action to stop it in its tracks or let those cortisol levels and adrenaline levels plateau, or at best to take action and for those cortisol and adrenaline levels to drop off. So I'll just give you a moment now to just jot down what are your early signs of strain. What might you notice about yourself, or what might other people notice about you? And a lot of this is about attuning to what's going on in our body. So I'll just give you a moment to write that down. So in terms of what can you do then, when you're recognizing that those signs of strain are there and your stress levels are higher than you ideally want them to be, what can you do about it? Well, these tools and techniques I'm about to share with you, they aren't going to be new to you. You will have heard of them before, but hopefully by having a greater understanding of the physiology, you will have, I guess it might increase your commitment to actually doing them because you'll know that physiologically it absolutely works. So one of those tools and techniques, of course, is to take deep breaths. Very, very simple, but highly effective. So when scientists were looking into the fight or flight response, they put some psychology students under stress and filmed their brain, and they saw the blood go shooting to the old part of the brain. And then they got the psychology students to take 3 breaths, breathing in for 7 counts and out for 11 counts 3 times. And they actually filmed the blood in the psychology students' brains move from the center back to the front of the brain. And of course, that is where we want it to be for us to be our best self and have increased resilience and well-being. So taking deep breaths, breathing in for 7, out for 11, or whatever count works for you, is a highly effective way of changing those cortisol and adrenaline levels in our body. And I often find myself, even before this session or before I'm about to go on stage at a conference or doing anything that requires me to be in a really good state, I will always do my 7-11 breathing. The other thing that's talked about often and is highly effective, of course, is mindfulness. So that ability to be very present and in the moment, not to let our mind race ahead and try and think 10 steps ahead. And mindfulness is a muscle that can be very weak and we can be inexperienced and unpracticed in it, or we can make that muscle stronger and become better and more and be more mindful more often. So it does require practice. And so if you want to practice mindfulness, I really encourage you to potentially download an app like Headspace, something like that, and do some active practice. Or it can be more sort of simple and spur of the moment than that. So you can be mindful right now and just think about, just plant both feet on your floor so you're nice and grounded. Concentrate on the sensation of the chair underneath your legs, on the breath entering and exiting your body, sensation of your top on your skin, whatever it is that gets you centered and present in that moment. That will help to lower your cortisol and adrenaline rather than be on high alert about what might be around the corner. So be as present as possible. The other thing you can do is hydrate. And you'll notice I've got a couple of glasses of water here, so important. And if we can keep ourselves nice and hydrated, our blood will be good, nice and oxygenated. All of our cells in our body will be functioning much more efficiently. I can't remember the stats now, but I remember reading that a high proportion of the population essentially are permanently dehydrated. Many of us don't drink anywhere near enough water. So I really encourage you to drink maybe 2 or 3 litres of water if you can today and see how you feel. And of course, another simple way to change our cortisol and adrenaline levels in our body is to move our bodies. So if you're sat down, stand up. If you're stood up, sit down. If you're inside, maybe step outside for a moment if you're safe to do so. If you're outside, come inside. If you're on your own, maybe reach out and have a chat with somebody, or go and find somebody in your household to go and annoy and distract. If you're with people, maybe go and have a moment on your own. Just do something small, take a small action just to change where you are, change your state, change your physiology in some way, and that will lower your cortisol and adrenaline. Or at worst, it will help to plateau and stop those hormone levels from increasing. So those 4 simple steps really are about changing your state. So there is no such thing as unresourceful people. There's only people who are in unresourceful states. And there's a slide here I want to share with you now, which I think I found helpful when thinking about changing my state. And it was put together by a chap called Tony Robbins, who is a well-known coach and businessman in the States. He's a little bit of a Marmite character. You kind of either love him or hate him, but I do like what he has to say on changing your state. And what Tony Robbins says, and I wholeheartedly agree, is that we can change our state very quickly. And we can do that in one of 3 ways. So we can change our state by changing the language we're using or the meaning that we're attributing to a situation. So you'll know if you say, God, this is a nightmare, this is catastrophic, how are we going to survive, how are we going to cope? If you use kind of quite inflammatory language like this, then it will make that particular situation feel all the more worse. And the signal that it's sending to your brain is fight or flight. You need to be high alert here. This is a crisis situation, or whatever it might be. We need increased cortisol and adrenaline in order to survive this. Whereas if you use language such as, we will get through this, I'm strong enough to cope, we've been through tricky situations before and I know we'll survive this again. More rational, calm language, then obviously the signal that that's sending to your brain is that we're fine, we're safe, this is difficult, but we have the resources and the skills and the ability to get through. And of course that links to the meaning, right? If we attribute significant meaning to something, then it's going to feel like a much bigger deal. So someone was saying to me the other day, and I thought it was quite a good way to approach it really, that say with this COVID-19 pandemic, how he's trying to think about it is almost with an air of curiosity. Isn't this interesting? We've never lived through anything like this before. What can I learn? What can I observe? What am I seeing about about human nature, about communities? And I just thought, yeah, that's quite a good approach. It's wherever possible to just approach things with an air of curiosity rather than fear. The other thing that Tony Robbins says is that we can change our state by changing what we focus on. So, for example, rather than focusing on what we can't control, focus on what we can control, what is within our influence, what is within our gift, rather than focusing on what we don't have or what we can't do. Focus on what we do have and what we can do. And I think it can also apply with changing our focus, in terms of where we're looking, even rather than focusing on your screen or on your phone or something like that. Focus on the horizon or on the tree, swaying in the breeze, or on a photo of your loved one or something like that. Something that would help to change your state. And finally, you can change your state by changing your physiology, and we've touched on some of these already. So deep breaths, keeping hydrated, changing your blood sugar levels. So if you feel a bit low in energy, going to get that nice crisp apple and really concentrating on the sensation of biting through and the sweetness, etc. And obviously moving our body. So this is this notion that you can change your state in a heartbeat, as quick as that, if you really, really want to. And you'll know, looking at these three areas, which of these will be your kind of go-to, if you like, which of these you'll find easiest. And again, a lot of this is about practice. So if you think of someone and bring into your mind's eye someone who, from your observations anyway, they just don't seem to get that stress. Sort of like water off a duck's back. Generally speaking, they will be individuals who are very good at managing their state. They'll be effective at lifting themselves, lifting their own energy when they need to. And they'll do that probably in one of these three ways. So next to your list of signs of strain that you wrote down just now, I just want you to jot down some ideas of how you can practice changing your state until you can do it as quickly as in a heartbeat. What will work for you? Is there a mantra you could say, if language and meaning is an area that you'd like to focus on? Or if you'd like to change your state by changing your focus, perhaps you could focus on what are you grateful for and practice that each day. Or if you think, do you know what, those two, I think I find a bit more tricky. I'm probably much more effective to simply change my physiology, certainly to begin with. Then what would work for you? Is it as simple as standing up if you're sat down? So just jot down some ideas now. And if you're a manager, or you're thinking, how can I best support my colleagues who I know and can see are in high levels of stress? One of the best things you can do for them is help them to change their state. So perhaps you might want to start off your conversation, building rapport, flippantly talking about what you did the night before, telling a joke, focusing on what's gone well, focusing on a positive. Maybe even kind of maybe you might want to have your sort of your meeting whilst doing your daily walk. Any way you can do to help your colleagues change their state, you will have a much more successful meeting and much more kind of effective conversation. If you can see that someone is going to find it really difficult to change their state, they're really quite at a point of low resilience, then it might be best to postpone that strategy to conversation or whatever it is, because you're not going to get the best out of them. And what that can lead to is a bit of a downward spiral, actually, whereby it can impact someone's confidence. I don't know if you've had it. I've certainly been there where I feel high stressed and just am not thinking clearly and effectively. And maybe one of my manager or something has said to me, Charlie, what are your ideas on this? And I've just had a complete mind blank. And I think, oh God, I do have some ideas. I just can't think of it now. And I come away, and then of course that's when I have all the great thoughts, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't say it in the moment. And then that can feed this notion of, that I'm not great at my job, or I'm not being that effective at the moment, which can impact on our self-esteem and our well-being. So if you are a line manager, I would really encourage you not to push it if you're with someone who is experiencing high stress, especially at the moment, when we have lots going on outside of work as well. So the best gift that you can give someone is to change their state. And a recent example of this for me was I was in Co-op getting my weekly shop, and this young lad, he must have been 19, had his sleeves rolled up, he's bright red, boiling hot, stacking the shelves, really physically working hard, And I just looked at him, I thought, my goodness, he is going all out for us to keep these shelves stocked so that we have what we need. And I just went up and I just, from a safe distance, thanked him. Not in a kind of thanks for what you're doing, but a genuinely heartfelt thank you for going above and beyond so that I can feed my family. And his state instantly changed. He was quite hunched over, quite kind of, like I said, quite seemed quite stressed in how he was going about it, and he just beamed. His whole stature, his whole body language changed. So I don't say that to kind of paint myself in this amazing light of look at me paying people compliments, but I share it because we can change someone's state even if we don't know who they are. We don't know what's going on for them. Just with a simple kind of recognition of what they're doing and heartfelt thanks and praise. So again, if you are a line manager on this call, just think through, when was the last time you really truly thanked your staff and gave them specific praise about what they're doing. So the key to this learning point of the webinar is to remember that it's not about being unresourceful and being a highly stressed person. It's that it's about being in an unresourceful state or having high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. And I think sometimes using the language of I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, can give us that label. And I've certainly worn that label myself, and I've fallen into the trap of saying, oh, my diary, it's back to back. If you want a meeting, book it in a couple of months because my diary is just a nightmare. I start my work when I get back to my desk at 6 o'clock in the evening, that way. And what signal was that sending to the people around me? It wasn't very positive. And if we know something about stress, is that it's contagious, right? What we put out there is what people will pick up. So if you are a manager or leader on this call, just think about the signals that you're sending to your colleagues and model that behavior that you'd like to see in them. So a lot of this, of course, is about self-care. Okay, so this wouldn't be, a well-being and resilience workshop if we didn't talk about self-care. Self-care is about taking actions and making decisions that boost our well-being. And we all, generally speaking, will do this some of the time, but most of us are pretty bad at self-care and doing it consistently. So day in, day out. So what I encourage you to do is to think about, how could you not only focus on self-care, but maybe practice radical self-care. So radical self-care is this notion that recognizes that for you to be the most effective partner, colleague, parent, sibling, member of your community, you first have to look after yourself. So many of us can think that self-care is almost a luxury, or maybe even something that's a bit selfish for us to focus on ourselves. Whereas what radical self-care is about recognizing that actually looking after ourselves is an altruistic act. By looking after ourselves, we can better serve the people around us. So you will know what your well-being boosters are. What are those things that really lift you up, that give you energy? here are some ideas on the screen at the moment. Some of these we'll be able to do more of than others. Some we'll be able to do less of at the moment with lockdown. But this is about attuning to what are your well-being boosters. Maybe just write down a few ideas now. And if you can be super clear about what your well-being boosters are, then you'll more readily and more easily be able to access them and do them. And be honest with yourself as well. You know, some of these things on here just won't be your cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine. I'd love to say that doing yoga was my, one of my well-being boosters. I just love the idea of that. But I've done yoga and it's just not for me. I just don't enjoy it. I might one day. I'm not going to kind of just always forever write it off, but I definitely had this sense that for me, yoga needed to be one of my well-being boosters, and I've tried it and I've tried it and I tried it. It's just not for me. So just be honest about what is for you and what isn't, because not everything is going to be your cup of tea. I'll send this round so you've got some of these ideas as well. So listen, we've talked quite a lot now about the physiology, the physical side of stress and how it impacts on our resilience and our well-being. And so I want you to, from this section, what I want you to take from it is that managing stress is about managing your cortisol and adrenaline levels. And it's too much to expect for yourself to go from a position of high stress, high cortisol and adrenaline to doing one of your well-being boosters. That's too much of a juxtaposition. You first have to change your state by doing one of those three things: changing the meaning or language, changing your focus, or changing your physiology in a small way. And once you've changed your state and you're feeling a bit more resourceful, the blood is back at the front of the brain, that is when you're more likely to take an action, such as doing one of your well-being boosters. Okay. Now what I want us to look at is just really to go a bit deeper. And there is something that in my own personal experience, but also through coaching hundreds of people now, there's one thing that can trigger high levels of stress and lower our resilience and lower our well-being, probably more than anything else. And to help explain this, I'm going to take you through what I call the ABC model. So let me bring that up now. So let's imagine, let's put COVID-19 aside for a moment, and let's just think about our kind of common challenges that we might come up against at work. So let's imagine the activating event is me as a head of department needing to go into a trustee meeting to make the case to ask for more resource. Okay, and this actually happened to me. This was a situation I found myself in about 2 or 3 years ago. And there was a pot of money, and me and my peers had the opportunity to kind of bid for it, if you like, almost pitch to the trustees to say, look, my department needs it the most. That was the activating event, me pitching to the trustees. The consequences that were going on for me in that moment was full on fight or flight response. So emotionally, I was all over the place. I was highly emotional, quite irritable, couldn't really focus. I found that I was kind of sort of avoiding my inbox, so it was piling up. Physically, I was shaking, my voice was wavering, my heart was racing, sweaty palms, lost my appetite. So in that moment, it felt like the activating event was causing those consequences. So we sort of think that situation is causing me to feel stress. And that is how I believed it, that is how I used to believe it was. However, since doing more work on this, I realized that there's something else going on. And using this example, I remember on the day I bumped into my colleague John, who also needed to pitch to the trustees. He went in after me. And I saw him later on. I was like, how did it go? And he said, how did what go? And I said, the pitch to the trustees. He went, oh, that, yeah, yeah, okay, I think, yeah. Well, we'll see, won't we? I'm sure they'll let us know in time. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted that it was so kind of far down on his radar that he didn't even realize what event I was talking about. And I know that John, you know, he was slightly more experienced than me, so that would be in his favor. The trustees, more of them were men, and that might have been in his favor in terms of you know, his kind of response to that situation. But ultimately, what for me was a highly stressful, activating event, for someone else, my peer John, was a kind of walk in the park, was quite a casual thing to have to do. So the consequences for him were the complete opposite. You know, emotionally, he seemed very relaxed. He had his sense of humour. I think physically, he came across well. And I'm sure, I don't know for certain, but I feel sure in my heart that he probably did a better job of pitching than I did, for the very reason that he didn't have that fight or flight response going on to the same degree anyway. So how can two people have the same activating event and yet have such different consequences? And so the difference between those two things and those two experiences is a set of beliefs that John and I would have had. So if you think about the beliefs that were going on for me in that time, I was thinking, I'm going to let my team down. If I don't get this right, we're not going to get the budget. My team were working, you know, they were up to here, they were at full capacity. I really felt the pressure to win this extra budget. And so all of that was going on, that added pressure. I'm not good enough to do this. I'm not going to come across well. I don't know what to wear. My voice is going to shake. The trustees aren't going to kind of buy into what I have to say. All of those limiting negative beliefs were going on for me, and of course were causing me to have that fight or flight response. Now, I don't know what beliefs were going on for John, but if I had to hazard a guess, I would imagine it was things such as, you know, the trustees have probably made up their mind to some degree already, and all I can do is just do my best. I know my stuff, and this is an opportunity for me to share the brilliant work that my team are doing. So he would probably have more. I'm not saying he doesn't have any limiting beliefs, of course he probably did, but his empowering belief, his positive beliefs in that moment were what were coming through more strongly, and therefore he was having more effective, more comfortable consequences. So very often in life, it's not the activating event that causes the fight or flight response. Sometimes it is, but not always. Usually it is the beliefs that we attribute to it. So let's remember that when I talk about beliefs, we're talking about something that we feel certain of, you know, because it's a thought that's in our head. It feels concrete, it feels like a fact. Whereas in fact, it may or may not be true. So beliefs are very, very powerful. They inform how we think about ourselves, what decisions we make. They inform quite often how we come across to others and who we are. So if we can have a grip on our beliefs and better manage those, then we can therefore better manage our stress response. In terms of where our beliefs come from, I mean, this is a huge topic to talk about, but very briefly, our beliefs usually come about when someone in a position of authority, represented by this person with a flip chart here, so a parent, a teacher, a manager, a sibling, someone we kind of look up to and trust, says something or does something towards us that evokes a high emotion in us. So that's depicted by the heart here. At a time when we are susceptible to believing something. And of course, often that is usually in our childhood. So a lot of our beliefs, whether they be empowering or limiting beliefs, have been formed during our childhood. Beliefs can also be formed at a time when we're susceptible to believing something, so that often is when we're perhaps more vulnerable. So I work with people who have been made redundant, say, and therefore at quite a vulnerable, difficult time in their life. And so therefore they may be more susceptible to believing something that's not as positive about themselves and forming new limiting beliefs. Or someone who's going through divorce or given a diagnosis or something like that, some life event that causes us to feel more vulnerable and be more susceptible to believing something. And of course, beliefs, you know, they can be empowering as well, and help form a positive story that we tell ourselves. But often when it comes to triggering the stress response, the fight or flight response, it's the limiting belief that has come into play. So grab your pen and paper, take a deep breath, just roll your shoulders a minute to change your state, shake out your arms a little bit. And I want us to do an exercise now looking at this very topic. So I want you to think about a belief. And if you feel comfortable to, write it down. But don't feel you have to. It might be a bit too confronting to write it down. But if you feel comfortable, write it down. And a belief that is holding you back, a belief that is stopping you from being the best version of yourself, a belief that maybe is triggering for you to feel a sense of stress. Just take a moment to write that down or to hold that belief in your mind's eye. It may be that quite a few limiting beliefs are coming up for you right now. And that certainly was the case when I first did this exercise. So what I just encourage you to do is just pick one. Just pick one, perhaps the one that is most impactful for you right at the moment. Once you've written that down, I want you to think through and write down, so how does it limit you? How does it hold you back? If it's causing you to feel higher levels of stress, what impact is that having on your life? Is it limiting you by stopping you from going for new opportunities or trying new things? Is it impacting on your well-being and your health? How is it limiting you? Just write down some bullet points. I'm not going to ask you to share this, obviously. It'd be difficult for us to do so in this format anyway, but this is very much an exercise for you. It's very personal. So now I want you to write down some descriptor words that really highlight who would you be if you didn't have this belief, if it was almost laughable that you could believe that about yourself. Who would you be? How would you come across to others? How would you feel? How would you be living life? Just give you a couple of minutes to write that down. And if you're struggling with this, maybe think about some positive feedback you've been given when you have been in a good, resourceful, highly effective state. Sometimes it can be hard to think of kind of positive descriptors about ourselves, isn't it? But it's hugely important to be able to do so and to readily be able to tap into that. So this isn't the time to be humble. Just be really clear about who would you be if you didn't have that belief. And therefore, what is the opposite of that belief? How could you write it in a way that is more empowering? So write down a belief that you choose to hold on to and strengthen and believe instead of this limiting belief. Write down a belief that serves you better. And now I want you to identify, how can you strengthen this empowering belief then? How can you make it the overriding story that you tell yourself? How can you make it your the strongest belief that you have? So when you're thinking about your empowering belief and how you want to strengthen it, there are a number of ways that people often do this piece of work, and it is a piece of work. It is something that we as individuals need to commit to doing for ourselves. Um, so if you are committed to this self-development, this self-growth, and you want to strengthen this empowering belief, you might find that putting it somewhere where you see it regularly will help. So maybe on your phone or in your notebook or written on a mirror somewhere. The more you can keep it at the front of mind, the more tangible and more kind of more of a reality it will become. Some people use kind of positive self-affirmations, so they might say that positive belief to themselves in the mirror or before they're going to sleep. Um, Whatever works for you. And a highly effective way of strengthening that empowering belief is to build up a body of evidence that strengthens it. So when you're given positive feedback that strengthens it, when you notice something like, oh yeah, that was me, living and breathing that belief about myself, bank it in your mind or save that email or whatever it might be, but build up that body of evidence. If you haven't got enough evidence, then put yourself into situations where you can gain that evidence. So I was coaching someone recently and they had an overarching limiting belief that they were boring. And so whenever they found themselves in situations that were a sort of activating event, if you like, perhaps they were around certain people or needing to do certain tasks, this limiting belief of I am boring, they don't want to listen to what I have to say, really kicked in for this individual. And of course, triggered the fight or flight response, or cortisol and adrenaline went up. They started having some of those stress symptoms, and actually then might have ended up making them almost fulfilling that limiting belief because they weren't thinking as clearly and maybe were not as articulate and were rambling a little bit. So it became a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they needed to address this limiting belief before the cortisol and adrenaline levels were going to be lowered in certain situations. And so what did this individual do? But they put themselves they sought out situations where they could test that belief. So he actually went and did some stand-up comedy, believe it or not. Something that had always been niggling at the back of his mind, or something if he was, brave enough, he'd love to give it a go. And bless his heart, off he went and did it. I just was so in awe that he put himself into that situation, and of course he did absolutely brilliantly. He got some feedback from people that he kind of trusted and knew would give him honest feedback. And actually, some of what come back to him was that he did need to work on his presentation skills. He did need to work on his ability to talk more succinctly and to make his point more clearly. And that was work that he could then go off and do through courses and so on, and through practice. So this is about recognizing that there may be a gap for you also, that some of this limiting belief, there might be some truth in it. If that's the case, then look at how you want to address it. But chances are it's not going to be the truth, certainly all of the time. So build up a body of evidence that contradicts that limiting belief and strengthens your empowering belief. So if you're thinking, perhaps you're on this call and you're someone who's on furlough leave, I've coached a few people over the last few weeks who are on furlough leave, and I've noticed kind of two different responses. So if we think about being placed on furlough leave as almost as the activating event, then some people that I've coached are in, their consequences are the consequences is that they're quite calm, they're enjoying life, they're making the most of things, they're doing things that they otherwise wouldn't have time to do. And then other people that I've coached are having a really difficult time with it, having high levels of stress, really feeling low in energy and so on. And what I've noticed is that there's a different set of beliefs that those two sets of individuals are attributing to the furlough leave. So some people are thinking, I'm doing my bit to help my charity by accepting this furlough leave. I'm helping them save money during this difficult time. It's not a reflection on who I am. It's not a reflection on how good I am at my job. It's not a reflection of how important my job is or not. It's just a symptom of the situation that the world at large is in. It's not personal to me. And then the other set of people who are having a more difficult time with it are attributing different beliefs, and things that are coming through are things such as if I was valued, then I would be deemed kind of vital in my role, or however it's phrased in the organisations, and therefore I wouldn't have been placed on furlough leave. And they're using it almost as an attack on themselves and their own self-worth and their own well-being. Self-confidence is taking a hit as well. So if we can change and manage our beliefs, that is how we can change our state and better manage our stress levels. So talking about limiting beliefs on a kind of webinar like this wasn't an easy decision to make. I wasn't sure whether to include it or not. It is quite a deep topic to talk about when I can't even see your faces. But for me, it has been, as well as understanding the physiology around stress and well-being and resilience and what goes on in my body, having better sense of what limiting beliefs are going on when I am experiencing that stress has really helped me to make different decisions in life, essentially, and choose to believe different things. And I can hand on heart say that I very, very rarely experience negative stress. Some stress is good for us, as we know, we work well when we've got a deadline coming up or something like that. So for some of us, some stress is good, but we don't want too much stress. We don't want bad stress. And since I've kind of done a lot of work on my limiting beliefs, my stress levels have nosedived, I'll be honest. So this isn't work that, you can kind of think, oh, job done, tick that box. I've got no limiting beliefs now. I only believe my empowering beliefs. This is ongoing work that we need to do throughout our life. And I've no doubt in my mind that there'll be a situation that will arise potentially very soon, who knows, where one of my limiting beliefs will raise its ugly head and come to the fore and cause me to have that fight or flight response. But when that does happen, I'm sure it will, I do feel better equipped to be able to manage that. And that's because I've done lots of work to really strengthen my empowering beliefs. So that's all I really want to say on the topic of empowering beliefs and limiting beliefs. Some people find it helpful to kind of label that inner gremlin, label that part of themselves, that inner critic that has that voice, that gives voice to those limiting beliefs, maybe give it a name, poke fun at it, think, oh, there you go again, telling me that I'm not good enough, or whatever it might be. You do not serve me, off you go, I don't need you right now. That might help. Have a bit of fun with it, give it a name, and just know that that voice, those set of beliefs, it's not who you are, it's just part of who you are, and it's a part of what's made you who you are today. So it has served you, but we just want to make sure that those limiting beliefs don't become so overwhelming or so central, or such a loud voice in your mind that it triggers the fight or flight response, and therefore your well-being and resilience is impacted. So the final section that I want to look at now is about our how we choose to spend our time, essentially. How we whether we feel highly energized or de-energized. And so I want to do another exercise now. So let me get the screen up. Grab your pen and paper. There we go, label your inner gremlin. I want you to think about a time in your career when you felt like this. When you were just going for it, you felt energized, upbeat, you're bossing it, you were just in your absolute element. I'd love to know what this young woman is dancing to. It's just amazing. I love watching this. I can't watch it and not smile. She's just loving life, isn't she? Completely authentic, completely in her element. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So take a moment now. Maybe you might need to stand up, shake out your body, just change your state, do a little dance like that if you want to. Just take a moment to think about a peak experience from your career, a time when you were fulfilled and happy. It doesn't have to be your current role. It can be a role that you've had in the past. But do try and be as specific as you can. Was it a particular day, a particular project you were working on, a particular group of people you were working with? Just bring it to your mind's eye as clearly as you can. And I want you to write down what is important to you about this experience. What is it that's made it memorable? Was it that you were um, making a difference? Was it that you were being creative? Was it that you were completing something? Was it that you were being really thorough? Was it that you were working with a bunch of people? Was it that you were working in a way that enabled you to really enjoy your home life as well? What was important to you about this experience? Just write down a few things that makes it stand out to you, makes it memorable. Okay. And just jot down a few bullet points that convey what were you doing, just so you can remember it when you look back at this exercise, maybe after this session or in the future, or maybe you might like to share it with your manager or someone that you work with. Just write down what were you doing, what is it that you were working on, just so you can remember. Where were you? When was it? What role was it? What was the task? What was the initiative? Now, this is the key bit of this exercise. I want you to write down a list of the strengths and the characteristics that you brought to that situation. What were your attributes? What were you being good at in this situation? This is not the time to be humble and think, oh, shucks, it was a team effort. Wasn't anything particular that I did. Absolutely not. Put those thoughts to one side. I want you to be as honest and as clear as possible about what was it that you were bringing. What were you being good at? So you'll end up with a really long list of things, of strengths and characteristics that you bring. Now, you might be finding this a little bit tricky. I know some people do find it hard to think about positives about themselves. If that is you, then maybe think, if an independent observer, so if Charlie or someone independent was watching me in this situation, how would they describe me? What words would they use to describe me in this situation? Sometimes that can help us to more readily identify our positives. Okay. Now I want you to open it up more broadly. So not only thinking about this specific peak experience, but think about you and your role more widely, and think, what other attributes and characteristics do I have that weren't necessarily applicable to this specific example that I brought to mind, but that I know that I have. So what other strengths and characteristics do you have? And make it as full a list as possible, as comprehensive a list as possible. Maybe think about some positive feedback that you've had and add that to the list as well. So you should have a nice long list of attributes, of strengths and characteristics that you have. Now I want you to look at that list and circle or put a star next to those strengths that you also enjoy using. So what I mean by that is, to use an example, I know that one of my strengths is that I'm good at strategic thinking. I can write a great fundraising strategy. I know that because I've done it many times in my career and I've got good feedback, and I just know it's something that I'm good at. I don't enjoy it though. It's something that can kind of sit on my to-do list and it hovers there in my eye, and I sort of am trying to avoid it, but I have to just kind of get it done. So it's a strength that I have that maybe I've developed over the course of my career, but I don't necessarily enjoy it. So I want you to be really honest and think, of these strengths, which ones do I also really enjoy? And you'll know if you enjoy it, because if you think about doing those strengths and using those strengths, you'll feel a sense of kind of positivity and high energy and pleasure and joy. So just be really clear about what are the strengths, what are things you're good at and you also enjoy. And they are called your energizing strengths. So those are those things you're good at and you really enjoy. So the reason why I'm asking you to think about and identify your energizing strengths is because it's the key really to spending your time on things that boost your resilience and boost your well-being, and spending less time on those things that do the opposite of that. So by being really clear about what are your energizing strengths, you can then make different decisions, and be more strategic about how you spend your time and what you prioritize and what you focus on. So no one burns out. People don't burn out from doing too much. People burn out because they do too little of what they love. So what I discovered when I burnt out was that actually when I looked at my average day today, a good portion of the tasks and good portion of my responsibilities were things that I found really, really difficult, did not come easily to me, that I felt underconfident in, just felt like wading through treacle, Maybe I might have learned to become good at them, but it certainly wasn't stuff that I enjoyed. The element of my role that I did really enjoy was the one-to-ones with my team, the team away days, the team meetings, the time where I was focused on developing others. And therefore, it's no surprise that as my career has developed, I've focused more and more and more on that area. And now I spend my life helping people to develop and enhance their skills and develop their well-being. And I've never worked as hard in my life since having my own business. But I've also never had such higher well-being and low levels of stress because I'm doing what I enjoy and I'm playing to my strengths, hopefully. So what I'm encouraging you to do is look at your energizing strengths and think, how can I use them more fully? So I was coaching someone the other day, and she organizes a big international conference once a year for the charity that she's employed by. And she's an events manager. And when we looked at what were her energizing strengths, something that she really enjoys about it and knows she's good at in terms of organizing events is that execution, on that day, clipboard in hand, headset on, delivering that event. That is when she is at her best. That's when she feels like that young woman dancing. She's just bossing it, that is her in her element. And yet, in her current role, she's only organizing one conference a year. It's a huge undertaking and requires a lot of her to organise it, but she only gets that hit of that kind of delivery of that event once a year. So it's no wonder then that her well-being is lower than is ideal, and her resilience is low, and her motivation, and she's feeling de-energized. And so she has gone away now to have a conversation with her manager about how could she build more events into her role. Could she get, so she's going to make that ask, could she get some extra help to help her with the annual conference, and then organise some of the smaller seminars and well, it's going to be online forums now, more frequently throughout the year, so that she more frequently gets that positive hit where she's playing to her energizing strengths. And I feel sure that if that comes to fruition and her manager supports and is able to make that possible for her, that her enjoyment of her role will go up. She'll be even better at it than she is already. And of course, her resilience and well-being will increase as well. So this is called job crafting. This is about crafting your role in a way that plays to your energizing strengths. So if you're a manager on the line, I would just encourage you to think, when would it be possible to have that conversation with your team members? Like, what is it that they really enjoy? What is it that they believe are their strengths? And how can you help them to cram as much of that stuff into their role? Of course, there's always elements of some of our jobs that don't play to our strengths. We find more difficult, or that we don't enjoy as much, and that's just the reality of life in a way. But what we don't want is to get to a point where that is just the majority of our role, because then no wonder we feel de-energized and we start to feel high levels of stress, etc. I remember I had a conversation with one of my direct reports at her annual appraisal. I said, Sophie, what is your ideal day at work? When do you come home and say, yeah, do you know what? That was a great day. And she said, Charlie, do you remember about 6 months ago? And I said, yeah. And she described a time when we had the opportunity to apply for a grant at very short notice, a very complex application. She said, well, do you remember that time when you asked me to do that application at really short notice? I was like, yeah. She said, I absolutely loved it. That is when I'm at my best, when I had to get on the phone to those senior stakeholders, get the information I needed right away with that short deadline, make the complex kind of information more simple and within the word limit for the application. I absolutely loved it. And I was like, oh my goodness, Sophie, I felt bad about giving you that task to do, because for me, that would be one of my worst nightmares of a task to have to do. And so it's just one of those kind of wake up moments for me in my career, whereby I realized that, what for me is a really difficult task and that I don't enjoy and I'm not particularly good at, for someone else is their energizing strengths. So as a line manager, it's my responsibility to understand what my team members' energizing strengths are, so that I can divvy out work and help them to craft their role in such a way that they're playing to those as much as possible and using those as much as possible. Because that is when I'm going to have a team that is high in energy, high in positivity, as resilient as possible, and has higher levels of well-being, and then of course are going to deliver the outcomes that we need. So I'll send you an article on job crafting at the end of this session, because it is an interesting topic and there's so much we could say about it. But I really bring you back to this point that people don't burn out because they're doing too much. People burn out because they're doing too little of what they love. And so often when I'm coaching people who are experiencing high stress, they often leave that first coaching session with more to do, but it's more of stuff that they love. So getting closer to nature, or being with their family more, or and crowding out those elements of their life that they don't love and they're not so good at. Just as a little caveat to that, if you are someone with and you recognize that you have perfectionist tendencies, like myself, I can sometimes find myself avoiding doing things that I'm not good at. I just avoid it because I'm not good at it, and then of course I don't get any better at it. So if there are things that you're not so good at but you do enjoy, then absolutely do play in that space, because that is where you're learning and growing as an individual. But what you don't want to do is put too much time, energy and focus in things that you're not good at and you don't enjoy. Find people around you for whom that is their energizing strength, and therefore you create a kind of stronger team for it. And for us to be at our most courageous, and my goodness me, if there's a time where we need to be bold and creative, this is it. We need to play to our strengths. This is not about thinking about what are my weaknesses, what do I need to develop, and how can I develop them. No, this is about strengthening your strengths even further. And you will find your resilience and well-being levels will increase as a result. So just to summarize where we've got to, and then we might have 5 minutes for some questions. Oh, this is just a little slide just before I get to summary. I'm thinking, just encourage you to think about who you're spending time with, who you're giving your time to, actually, and making sure that you're spending enough time with your energizing angels. So those people that lift you up, that champion you, that support you, that challenge you, but in a supportive way, versus those energy vampires, those people who bring you down, who de-energize you, who are more negative. And look, this isn't to do those energy vampires down. They'll be doing the best they can in a difficult situation, I'm sure. It might be that they've got some limiting beliefs going on, or they've got things going on for them that is making them an energy vampire right now, or it makes that part of their personality. But if you are feeling low and resilient, it might be worth just doing a little quick audit of who are you spending time with, and have you got enough time in your diary or in your life with your energy angels. If you do have to interact with an energy vampire, then make sure that that interaction is kind of sandwiched between two interactions with your energy angels. So you're lifted up, you go into an interaction with your energy vampire, you get through that, and then you're lifted up again by your energy angel. And of course, the best way to attract more energy angels into our life is to be one ourselves. So very briefly, to summarize, we've talked about well-being and resilience and how the two are interconnected. So to have a better chance of being resilient, it helps for us to have strengthened our well-being. And for us to have high levels of well-being, we need to be able to bounce back from challenges. Really helps to understand the physiology. So when we're talking about stress, we're talking about cortisol and adrenaline. So we need to get better as individuals at managing those hormone levels in our body. So best place to start is to get better at recognizing your early signs of strain, those early symptoms of stress for you. And then take action to change your state, become more resourceful. So change either the language you're using or the meaning you're attributing to that situation, or change the focus that you're having, or change your physiology in some way. And practice radical self-care. Recognize that for you to be the best version of yourself, and therefore be a great colleague, parent, sibling, etc., member of your community, you first need to look after yourself. It's an altruistic act to practice self-care. Limiting beliefs, that inner critic, that inner gremlin, is what can often trigger a fight or flight response. Actually, often it isn't the activating event, it's the belief that we have that we attribute to that event. So if we can manage our limiting beliefs and strengthen our empowering beliefs, we will better manage our stress. So what this is about choosing one thought over another, and that is our best weapon against stress. Play to your energizing strengths. Find your empowering support group, your group of people, your energy angels who lift you up. And of course, ask for help. So that brings us to an end. Let me just have a quick look at the questions that have come up. Charlie, do you have any advice, ideas on how we can reassure and look after people and their well-being when returning back to work in the current climate, especially how we engage with people to do this? I'm an HR manager. So I think thanks for that question. The unique situation that we're in at the moment means that the symptoms of COVID-19 are very similar to the symptoms of stress, if you think about it. So some of the people I've coached have had COVID-19, or their loved ones have, or people close to them have. And so when I've been talking to them about recognizing the signs of strain, they say, but the thing is, I'm so tapped into that already that it then becomes a bit of a downward spiral, because I'm thinking maybe I've got the illness again, or maybe my loved one has the illness. So that, I think, is the real unique, tricky situation about this pandemic, and in the context of managing stress, is that the actual illness and the symptoms of stress and the experience of stress are really, really closely interlinked. In terms of supporting people back to the workplace, I think firstly, employers just have a need to recognize that this is completely unique. We're not talking about stress and resilience and well-being in the usual sense of the terms, in terms of the workplace. This is much more significant, much more impactful, much more important. So I think one of the best things that employers can do, and there's lots that they can do, but one of the best things is to be as flexible as possible. So like at the moment, it's probably unrealistic to expect someone who has to look after children, expect them to work 9 till 5 as they maybe ordinarily would. Don't know about anyone else on this call, but I'm working early in the morning, I'm working at lunchtime when my 18-month-old is asleep, and I'm working in the evening. So it's showing that flexibility and that care. And the same goes with the kind of job crafting. If you can be flexible in terms of how someone goes about their job and help them to do as much as possible of the stuff that lifts them up and makes them feel good, then you will have a more effective employee as a result of that. It's a huge topic, Louise, and I don't feel my answer has really done your question justice, because it is a great question. So if you want to have a conversation outside of this, I'd love to have a chat. I'd love to pick up on that. So just drop me a line. I'll email you all these slides anyway, so you'll get my email address. I'm going to bring this to a close just because I know how precious your time is, and I really don't want to overrun. I know how frustrating that can be when things drag over. So there were other questions that came through, so I promise I will answer those to you directly. Thank you so much for trusting me with your time, and I hope that you have got some useful practical tools and maybe some different ways of thinking as well to take you into the rest of your week. I'm Charlie. Let me know if I can help you or your teams at any time in the future. I hope we can keep in touch. And I wish you all the best for the rest of your week, and take care and stay safe, of course. Thanks, everyone. Oh, thanks for your comments. That's lovely. Thank you. I'm glad you found it helpful. It's a big topic. Never know quite what to include and what to exclude. So I welcome any feedback. I'm learning and growing as well. So any feedback, let me know. Some familiar names are popping up. So good to see you've managed to join, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks, everyone.